He didn't think twice, he just jumped. 36 years old, work boots still on, phone still in his pocket. Owen Mercer hit that black harbor water like a man who had nothing to lose. Because honestly, he thought he didn't. He pulled her out. She was breathing. He thought it was over. Then at 1:17 in the morning, someone knocked on his door. And when he opened it barefoot, shaking, eyes full of something she couldn't say out loud, everything he thought he understood about that night fell apart. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, subscribe. You don't want to miss where this goes. Owen Mercer had a rule he lived by, and he'd lived by it long enough that it didn't feel like a rule anymore. It just felt like the truth. Machines don't lie to you. A diesel engine either runs or it doesn't. A bilge pump either holds pressure or it fails. A hull either has integrity or it takes on water. There's no in-between with machines. No hidden agenda. No smile that means something different than what's on the surface. People were another matter entirely. He'd learned that the hard way. Once with a business partner who walked off with 18 months of contracts. Once with a woman he'd married, young and loved completely, and lost anyway. And once, most painfully, in a courthouse in Providence, where a judge read out a custody schedule that felt less like justice and more like a sentence. Every other weekend, that was what he got. Every other weekend with his son, Caleb, who was 9 now, and still asked Owen on the phone, sometimes, in that quiet way kids have dad, "Are you okay?" Because even at 9, Caleb could hear something in his father's voice that Owen didn't know was there. So Owen kept to himself. He kept his hands busy. He took contracts. Nobody else wanted the rusted-out commercial fishing boats, the neglected sport fishers sitting dead in their slips, the restoration jobs that required more patience than profit. He rented a small apartment above his workshop on the east edge of the Newport Marina, where the smell of salt and diesel was so constant he'd stopped noticing it years ago. He worked. He slept on his weekends with Caleb. He came alive in a way that made the other 12 days feel like waiting. That was his life. And he had made a kind of peace with it. The night it all changed was a Thursday in late September, and it had already been a long one. Owen had spent 11 hours replacing the raw water impeller and exhaust manifold on a 42-foot Hatteras that belonged to a real estate developer who called twice a day with questions he clearly didn't understand the answers to. The kind of client who wanted to feel involved without doing any of the actual work, and Owen had learned to answer politely, keep his voice even, and hang up the phone before saying what he actually thought. By 7:30, he was washing grease off his hands at the utility sink, his back aching in that specific way it did when he'd been bent over an engine bay too long. The radio in the corner of the workshop was playing something low and forgettable. The marina outside was quiet, just the sound of water moving against hulls, the occasional creak of a dock line. He was thinking about dinner, specifically about whether there was anything in his refrigerator besides a 6-pack of beer, and what he suspected was aging takeout. He was also thinking about Caleb, because he always was. His son was supposed to call at 8, and Owen was already watching the clock. That was when he heard it. At first, he thought it was a gull. There were always gulls near the marina at dusk, and they made sounds that could startle you if you weren't paying attention. But this wasn't a gull. A gull doesn't make a sound that lands somewhere in your chest and makes your hands go still. He turned off the water, listened. There it was again, high and broken, and absolutely human. A woman's voice, coming from the south end of the marina where the channel opened up toward the main harbor. Owen stood there for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds of thinking. Someone else will handle it. Someone from that event. There are 100 people over there. And then something older than thought took over. He moved. He came around the corner of the last dock building at a run, and the first thing he saw was the lights, strings of white lights, hung between masts. The kind of setup that said money and charity in equal measure. There was a yacht, a big one, maybe 60 feet, moored at the guest pier, with people in evening clothes clustered along its rail and on the dock beside it. They were all looking at the water. Some were pointing. Two men at the edge of the dock were shouting down into the darkness below. A woman in a red dress had both hands pressed over her mouth. A man in a tuxedo was on his phone, turned away from the scene, talking fast. Owen didn't slow down. He pushed through the cluster of people at the dock's edge, looked down, and saw her. She was maybe 15 feet out from the dock, in that black harbor water that, in late September, has already gone cold enough to make your muscles stop cooperating with your brain. Cold enough to rob you of the ability to think clearly about what your arms are supposed to be doing. She wasn't screaming anymore. That was what hit him hardest. The screaming had stopped, which meant she was past screaming, which meant she was past the stage where panic has energy behind it, and into the stage where the body just starts to give. Her head was barely above the surface. Her hands were moving, but weakly, that terrible motion flailing. That looks like swimming but isn't. That looks like fighting but is actually the beginning of something else. Owen pulled off his jacket. He was over the rail before anyone on that dock had time to process what was happening. The water hit him like a door slamming. Cold, not just cold, but the specific cold of the North Atlantic in autumn. The kind that makes your lungs seize for a moment, and your brain send out a white flash of pure animal panic before training and will override it. He'd grown up around this water. He knew this cold. He kicked hard, found his rhythm, and covered the distance in under a minute. She went under just as he reached her. He grabbed cloth, then skin, then the firm grip of a wrist and pulled upward, hard. She came back to the surface, coughing and gasping and grabbing at him with surprising desperation, her fingers digging into his shoulder, both of them going under for a moment before he got his footing on nothing and kicked again. "I've got you," he said. And he wasn't sure if he said it out loud or just thought it. "Stop fighting. I've got you." She didn't stop fighting right away. They never do, not immediately. But she heard him. He could feel the shift in her body. The way the desperate grabbing eased slightly into something that was still fear, but was at least working with him instead of against him. He got her to the dock ladder. Hands came down from above a dock worker, a marina employee. Someone who knew what they were doing, and they got her up first. And then Owen pulled himself up after, his work boots hitting the planks of the dock with a sound like wet wood on wet wood. He was on his hands and knees for a moment, water pouring off him, lungs burning. Then he got up. She was sitting on the dock, wrapped in someone's jacket already, someone kneeling beside her, and she was coughing that deep, body-shaking cough that means the water got in, but she was upright, and her eyes were open, and she was, by every measure that mattered, alive. That was when he got his first real look at her. She was somewhere in her early to mid-30s. Dark hair plastered against her face. Evening clothes, the kind that didn't come off rack, even waterlogged and shaking, sitting on a dock in the dark. There was something about the way she held herself that suggested this was a woman who, under normal circumstances, was in control of most rooms she walked into. Except right now she wasn't in control of anything, and she knew it. And that gap between who she normally was and what she looked like right now, Owen could see it in her face, the humiliation of it, layered under the fear. "Ma'am," he said, crouching down, "you with me?" She turned and looked at him. Her eyes were dark brown or green. He couldn't tell in the dock lighting. And they were the most alert eyes he'd ever seen on someone who'd just come out of the water. Most people, when they've nearly drowned, look inward. They go somewhere else for a while. She was entirely present, looking straight at him, taking him in with an expression he couldn't read. "I'm with you," she said. Her voice was rough from the coughing, but clear. "Good. EMTs are coming. Don't try to stand yet." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You just..." "I'm fine," she said again, quieter. And there was something in the way she said it that was different from the reflexive denial people make when they've been frightened. This was deliberate. This was a message she was sending, and Owen had the strange sense that it wasn't aimed at him, but at something behind him. He turned. The man walking down the dock toward them was maybe 40, tall, well-dressed in the particular way that says, the money is old enough that the clothing choices are effortless. Dark suit, no tie, the kind of face that belonged in a boardroom or a profile photo attached to a large donation. He was moving quickly, but not running the careful, measured stride of someone who understood that how you arrive matters. Claire, his voice was controlled, almost soothing. My God, Claire, are you all right? The woman Claire apparently looked up at him, and Owen, who was still crouching right beside her, saw something happen in her face that he would not forget. It wasn't relief. He'd expected relief, the person you love arriving when you're frightened. That specific unwinding, and this wasn't it. There was something tighter, something guarded. I'm okay, Graham, she said. Graham crouched down on her other side, put a hand on her arm, looked at her with an expression of deep concern. Then he looked at Owen. Thank you, he said. His voice was warm. His eyes were not. It's nothing, Owen said. It's everything, Graham said. We'll make sure you're compensated. That's not necessary. Of course it is. Graham was already looking away, already looking back at Claire, already. And this was the part Owen's brain filed away, without quite knowing why, already positioning himself, so that his body was slightly between Claire and Owen. A move so casual it almost didn't register. Almost. The EMTs arrived 4 minutes later, efficient, professional. They got Claire onto a stretcher, with the practiced ease of people who'd done it many times, checked her vitals, started asking the standard questions. Graham walked beside the stretcher, still talking to Claire, to the EMTs, into his phone, organizing, managing, controlling the situation the way someone controls a situation when they are very, very good at it. Owen stood back. His clothes were soaked through, and the September night was cold enough, now that he was starting to feel it in a serious way. Someone had brought him a blanket from somewhere, the yacht, probably, and he'd taken it without really thinking about it. He watched them load Claire into the ambulance, and right before the doors closed, she turned her head and found him, in the crowd, in the chaos, across the distance of the dock. She found him the way fuel find a fixed point when everything else is moving. And she mouthed something. He read it clearly. He'd spent enough years watching Caleb talk through a window on supervised visits to have gotten very good at reading lips. Don't tell. Don't tell what? He didn't know. He still doesn't fully know, even now, what she meant in that exact moment. But he nodded anyway, a small, barely perceptible nod, because something in her eyes made it impossible to do anything else. And then the doors closed. Owen walked back to his workshop. He peeled off his soaked clothes, stood under the hottest shower his water heater could manage, and stood there until the shaking stopped. Then he dried off, pulled on clean jeans and a flannel shirt, and heated up whatever was in the back of the refrigerator, without looking at it too closely. He called Caleb. Dad, you sound weird. Long day, bud. Did something happen? Nothing bad. He thought about that, actually. Something kind of happened. I helped somebody tonight. What kind of somebody? A woman. She fell in the harbor. There was a pause. Caleb processed things carefully, always had, even as a small kid. Is she okay? Yeah, she's okay. Good. Another pause. Were you scared? Owen thought about the water, the cold, her hand when he grabbed it. A little, yeah. But you still did it. Yeah. Okay, Caleb said, with the simple, complete satisfaction of a 9-year-old who has received all the information he needs. Okay, Dad. They talked for another 20 minutes about school, about a project involving volcanoes, about whether it would be okay if they went fishing on his weekend. Owen made coffee he didn't need, and sat in the single chair in his apartment and let his son's voice fill the room. He didn't tell Caleb about Don't Tell. He didn't tell anyone. He went to bed at 10:30, slept badly, and woke up several times thinking he'd heard something. He hadn't. The night was quiet. The harbor was quiet. The city outside his window was dark and still and made the sounds cities make when the people in them are finally, temporarily, at rest. And then, at 1:17 in the morning, someone knocked on his door. Not the building door, not the workshop door below. The apartment door, the one at the top of the narrow interior stairs, that nobody who didn't already know this building would think to look for, let alone climb in the dark. Owen sat up, listened. Another knock, not hard, not the frantic knock of emergency. The careful knock of someone who needs to be heard, but is terrified of being heard by the wrong person. He got up, he went to the door. He didn't turn on the light, because some instinct told him not to. He opened it. She was standing at the top of his stairs in bare feet. The hospital bracelet was still on her wrist. Her hair had dried in the way hair dries when there's no effort put into it, and she was in clothes that weren't hers. A sweatshirt too big in the shoulders, jeans that didn't quite fit right, the kind of borrowed things you throw on when you leave somewhere quickly. She was shaking, not from cold. She was looking at him with eyes that had been holding something for a long time, and were very close to not being able to hold it anymore. And Owen Mercer, a man who trusted machines and kept to himself, and had made a careful peace with a quiet life, stood in his doorway and looked at this woman he had pulled out of the water 6 hours ago. "How did you find me?" he asked. "The dock workers know you," she said. "Everyone around this marina knows you." She stopped. Her jaw worked for a moment. "I didn't know where else to go." He stood aside. He let her in. And just like that, his quiet life was over. Owen stepped back from the door, and she walked in. And for a moment, neither of them said anything. That kind of silence has weight to it. It's not comfortable, and it's not awkward. It's the silence of two people who both understand that whatever gets said next is going to matter, and neither one of them is ready to be the first one to say it. He pulled a chair from the small table by the wall and set it in the center of the room. She sat down without being asked, which told him something. She wasn't so far gone that she'd lost her instincts. She knew when something was being offered, and she knew how to take it without making it complicated. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No." "Did they check you out at the hospital?" "Yes." "And they released you?" "I released myself." He looked at her. The hospital bracelet on her wrist caught the low light from the single lamp he'd turned on. That cheap plastic band with her name and a barcode printed on it. And it looked wrong on her wrist, the way anything institutional looks wrong on someone who is used to being in charge of their own life. "You signed yourself out AMA," he said. She looked up. "How do you know what that means?" "I've spent enough time in emergency rooms with boat injuries to know what AMA means." She almost smiled, not quite, but the corners of her mouth moved in a way that suggested, under different circumstances, she might be capable of it. "Yes," she said, "I signed out AMA." "Why?" And there it was. The question she'd clearly been asking herself since the moment she climbed out of whatever situation she'd climbed out of, to end up at the top of his stairs at 1:17 in the morning. Why here? Why him? Why now? "Because I needed to think," she said carefully. "And I couldn't think in that room." "Why not?" She didn't answer that one. She looked down at her hands instead, bare hands. No rings, which he noticed and filed away. Without knowing why, and she was quiet for long enough, that he went to the small kitchen and put the kettle on. Not because he thought tea was going to fix anything, but because it gave his hands something to do, and it gave her something to look at that wasn't him. "Graham was there," she finally said. "At the hospital. He never left." She said it without inflection, like she was describing weather. "From the moment they brought me in. He was there, in the room." talking to the doctors, answering questions that they were asking me. She paused. Like I wasn't capable of answering them myself. Owen didn't say anything. He poured hot water into 2 mugs and brought them to the table and sat down across from her. "He's your fiancé," he said. She looked at him sharply. "How do you know that?" "Someone on the dock said it when he showed up." She wrapped both hands around the mug and stared at it. "Yes, he is. He seemed worried about you." "He's always worried about me," she said. And there was something in the way she said it, not bitter exactly, but worn. The way a stone gets worn smooth when water runs over it long enough, that made Owen go still. In the particular way he went still, when an engine made a sound he didn't recognize and needed to locate. "That's not a good thing?" he asked. She looked up at him. "Would you like it?" she said quietly. "If the person who was supposed to love you treated every room you walked into like a problem they needed to manage." He didn't have an answer for that, or rather, he had one, but it required more personal disclosure than he was prepared to offer a woman he'd known for approximately 6 hours, 2 of which she'd been unconscious. "No," he said, "I wouldn't." She nodded, like he'd confirmed something she'd been telling herself for a long time and had needed, for reasons she couldn't fully articulate, to hear from someone else. The clock on the microwave read 1:24. The harbor was silent outside the window. The whole city felt like it was holding its breath. "What did you mean?" he said, on the dock. "When you said don't tell." She went very still. The kind of still that isn't peace but is the opposite of it. The stillness of someone who has been waiting for a specific question and is now deciding whether or not to answer it. "I wasn't sure you saw that," she said. "I saw it." She set down the mug. She looked at the table for a long moment, and then she looked at him with eyes that had made a decision. "We were arguing," she said. "Graham and I, before I went in the water. We weren't in the main group. We'd stepped away from the event because he wanted to talk. He always wants to talk when there are enough people around that I can't make a scene." "What were you arguing about?" "My inheritance," she said it simply. Like those 2 words explained everything, and in a way they did. "My father's estate. There's a trust. The Beaumont Harbor Trust. It controls a significant amount of capital. And there's a board. And for the last 2 years, Graham has been positioning himself, getting close to the board members, making himself indispensable to the management structure." She paused. "He asked me 3 months ago to sign a document that would give him joint fiduciary authority." "Did you sign it?" "No." "Why not?" "Because my father's attorney, Diana Marsh, told me not to." She said she'd seen language like that before, and it was designed to. She stopped, chose her words carefully. It was designed to look like partnership and function like control. Owen leaned back in his chair. He dealt with enough contracts in his business, enough people who smiled when they handed you paperwork, to understand exactly what she was describing. And tonight, he said, on the dock, she was quiet again. This quiet was different. This was the quiet of someone approaching something they haven't said out loud yet. And when you say something out loud for the first time, you make it real. And sometimes making it real is the most frightening part. "We were at the edge of the dock," she said, away from the lights. He was very calm. He's always calm when he's serious. And he said he needed an answer about the document. He'd been patient long enough, and he needed to know that I was with him. She swallowed. "I told him I wasn't going to sign it. I told him Diana had advised against it, and that I agreed with her. And he..." She stopped. "He what?" Owen said. "He grabbed my wrist." She said it without drama, without performance, just the fact of it. Sat down on the table between them. "He grabbed my wrist, and he walked me very close to the edge. And he said, Claire, you need to understand what you're choosing." She paused. "And then he let go." The kitchen was very quiet. "He let go," Owen repeated. "Yes." "Of your wrist." "Yes." She met his eyes, right at the edge. Owen sat with that for a moment. The picture it painted was clear enough. A man with his hand on a woman's wrist, at the edge of a dock, in the dark. At a party where everyone was drinking and looking the other way. The thin line between a grip and a release. The thin line between a threat and an accident. "Claire," he said carefully, "are you saying he pushed you?" "I'm saying he let go," she said, "and that I lost my balance." She looked at him steadily, "And that I don't know if that's the same thing." "Do you think it is?" She looked down at her hands again, at the hospital bracelet, at her bare fingers where a ring presumably usually lived. "I don't know what I think," she said. And for the first time her voice cracked slightly at the edges. "I know what I felt. I know that when I was going into that water I looked at him. And he was just standing there, watching." She pressed her lips together. "And then someone screamed, and he started shouting for help." Owen said nothing. He was thinking about the man on the dock, the measured walk, the controlled voice, the hand positioned just so on Claire's arm, the way his eyes had been warm and cold at the same time, in that specific combination that Owen recognized from a certain kind of person, the kind of person who understood that presentation was everything. "Why don't you want me to tell anyone?" he said. "Because I have no proof," she said. "Because he's Graham Ellison. Because his family has been sitting on the boards of half the institutions in the city for 30 years. Because the moment I say what I think happened, I become the unstable woman making accusations against her fiancé. And every decision I've ever made, every position I've ever taken about the trust, gets reframed as the behavior of someone who can't be trusted with her own affairs." She said it fast, like it was something she'd rehearsed, not because it wasn't true, but because it was true, enough that she'd had to think it through very carefully before she could say it. "And you came here," Owen said. "I told you. I didn't know where else to go. You have friends, family." "My family is the trust," she said flatly. "And my friends are people Graham introduced me to, over the last 4 years, very gradually, in a way that seemed like generosity at the time." She looked at him. "I have one friend who's actually mine, Elise. She's in Boston right now. I've been trying to reach her." Owen nodded. He stood up and went to the window and looked out at the harbor for a long moment, not because there was anything to see, but because he needed to think. And, he thought, better on his feet. Here was what he knew. A woman he'd pulled out of the harbor 6 hours ago was sitting in his kitchen at 1 a.m. She was telling him something that could be nothing, or could be everything. She had a hospital bracelet and borrowed clothes on her back and bare feet on his floor. She was clearly intelligent, clearly frightened, and clearly in the habit of holding herself together through situations that would have unraveled most people. She was also, by her own telling, in the middle of something that involved significant money, and a man who had not liked the look he'd given Owen on that dock. And that knock on his door, that careful, terrified knock at 1:17 in the morning, had already involved him whether he'd chosen it or not. He turned back from the window. "There's a pull-out couch," he said. "It's not comfortable, but it's dry and it's warm. You can stay tonight." She looked at him. "You don't know me." "No," he agreed. "But I know what somebody looks like when they have nowhere to go. My kid looked at me like that once, in a parking lot, when things were very bad between me and his mother. And I told him the same thing I'm telling you. Tonight, you're safe. That's all you need to figure out right now." Something shifted in her face. Not the crack he'd seen before, something quieter than that. The specific look of someone who has been holding on very tightly for a very long time, and has just been given permission, briefly, to stop. "Thank you," she said. "Just that. Do you want more tea?" "Yes," she said, "please." He put the kettle back on, and for a while, they sat in the small apartment above the workshop, while the harbor moved quietly outside and the clock moved from 1:20-something to 2-something. And they talked not about the dock, not about Graham, not about the trust, but about smaller things. The kind of smaller things that people talk about when they need to let the bigger things settle without getting Greg crushed by them. She asked about his work. He told her about the Hatteras, About the client who called twice a day. She laughed a little at that. A real laugh. Brief and surprised. Like it came out before she could decide whether to let it. He asked where she grew up. Newport, she said. But the kind of Newport that's very different from the kind most people imagine. Private. Contained. A childhood that looked like privilege from the outside and felt like a set of expectations from the inside. Your father, he said. Was he? He was good, she said, and the present tense slip to past tense landed in the room quietly. He was a good person. He built the trust because he actually believed in what it was supposed to do. Support the harbor. Support the waterfront community. He didn't build it to be she stopped. He didn't build it to be what it's becoming. What is it becoming? A vehicle, she said. For someone who understands a vehicle out of anything. Owen thought about that. He thought about the way Graham had walked onto that dock, like he owned it. The way he'd looked at Owen warm, dismissive, final. The way he'd positioned his body between Claire and everyone else, so naturally that you had to be paying attention to notice it. Owen had been paying attention. My phone is dead, she said suddenly. She looked at the hospital bracelet again. I left the hospital so fast I didn't. There's a charger on the counter. Blue cable. She found it, plugged her phone in, and sat back down. They waited while it powered up. When it did, the notifications came in a cascade 15 texts, 7 missed calls, a voicemail that she looked at and immediately closed without listening to. Owen watched her face while she looked at her phone. She was careful about her expression, but not careful enough for someone who was trained to read machinery by the way it moved. She was afraid. Not in the way she'd been afraid in the water, which was the honest physical fear of the body. This was the quieter, more persistent kind, the kind that lives in the stomach rather than the lungs. Graham, he said. She turned the phone so he could see the screen without answering. There were 11 texts from Graham. He read the visible previews without touching the phone. Where are you? Claire, I know you left. Emma, I need you to tell me where you are. I spoke to the hospital staff. This is not safe, you need to. Please, I'm worried. I love you. Just tell me you're okay. Owen looked at the last one. I love you. Just tell me you're okay. The words that, in another context, would be the words of someone frightened for the person they love. In this context, in this sequence, at this hour, they were something else. They were a hand on a wrist, a very different kind of hand. Don't answer him, Owen said. She looked at him. Something behind her eyes shifted slightly surprise. Maybe that he'd said it so directly. But she nodded. Not tonight, he added. Not when you're tired and alone, and he has all the advantages. She stared at the phone for another moment. Then she turned the screen face down on the table and pulled her hands back. Okay, she said. Not tonight. It was approaching 2:30 when she finally stopped fighting the exhaustion and accepted the pull-out couch. Owen found sheets in the closet clean, thankfully, because he'd done laundry the previous weekend in preparation for Caleb's visit, and a blanket that had seen better days but was warm enough. He set them on the couch and told her where the bathroom was and went to bed himself. He lay in the dark for a long time, listening to the harbor, the sound of water on hulls, the distant bell of a channel marker, the 1,000 small sounds of a marina at rest that he'd stopped hearing years ago and could suddenly hear again now with unusual clarity. He thought about don't tell. He thought about he let go. He thought about the way Graham Ellison had said, we'll make sure you're compensated smooth and immediate, and aimed perfectly at the place where a working man from the marina might be expected to have his price. He thought about Caleb asking, but you still did it. He fell asleep somewhere past 3 and woke at 5:45 to the sound of his phone. Not a call, a text, unknown number, but the area code was Newport. He sat up and read it. It said, Mr. Mercer, my name is Graham Ellison. I believe you helped my fiancée last night, and I'm grateful. I understand she may have been in contact with you after the hospital. I'd appreciate a call at your earliest convenience. This is a personal matter, and I'd like to handle it discreetly." Owen read it twice. Then he put his phone face down on the nightstand, exactly the way Claire had put her phone face down on his table 4 hours before. He got up, he put coffee on, and then he went quietly to check that the door at the top of the stairs was locked. It was. He stood there with his hand on the deadbolt for a moment, listening to the sound of his own breathing, the sound of the coffee maker beginning its cycle, the sound of water lapping somewhere below against the hull of a boat that needed fixing. Machines, he thought. Machines are predictable. Then he went to start the coffee and figure out what exactly he had stepped into. At 6:15, the floorboards in the main room shifted in the way they shifted when someone was up. He heard soft footsteps, careful, trying not to wake him, and then the sound of the kitchen tap. He came to the doorway. She was standing at the kitchen counter with a glass of water, already dressed, her hair pulled back, the hospital bracelet gone from her wrist. He'd find it later, on the edge of the bathroom sink, discarded like something she'd decided done with. Muff. She looked at him when he appeared in the doorway. For a second. Early morning. No pretense available. They just looked at each other. "I was going to leave before you woke up," she said. "I noticed." She looked at the water in her hand. "I didn't want to make this more complicated for you." "It's already complicated," he said, not unkind, just true. She set down the glass. "He texted you, didn't he?" It wasn't a question. Owen crossed the room and got 2 mugs from the cabinet and poured coffee into both of them, without asking if she wanted any. "Yes," he said, at 5:45. She took the mug he offered. "What did he say?" "He wants to handle it discreetly." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Almost. Of course he does." "Claire." He waited until she looked at him. "You need to call your attorney. Today. Not tomorrow. Not after you've had time to think about whether you're making a bigger deal out of this than it is, which is what I suspect you're currently talking yourself into." He held her gaze. Today. She was quiet. Outside, the early morning light was beginning to change the quality of things in the way it does in a harbor town. The water going from black to gray to something almost silver, and the sounds of the marina beginning their slow transition from night sounds to day sounds. "Diana is going to ask me what happened," Claire said. "Good," Owen said. "Tell her. She's going to ask what I can prove. Tell her that, too." She looked at him. This was the part he understood, where she decided, not just whether to call Diana Marsh, but something larger than that, whether she was going to keep doing what she'd apparently been doing for some time, which was absorbing what was happening to her and managing it quietly and telling herself she could handle it alone, or whether she was going to stop. Just stop. And let someone else stand in the room with her for once. Her phone lit up on the table. She looked at it. Graham again, not a text this time. A call. The screen lit and buzzed and sat there between them like something with its own agenda. Owen didn't say anything. He held his coffee and he waited. She looked at the call. She looked at Owen. She looked back at the call. And then she reached out and turned the phone face down. "Okay," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it was steady. Steadier than he would have expected. Steadier, he suspected, than she felt. "I'll call Diana." The phone stopped buzzing. The kitchen was quiet. And somewhere below them, in the workshop, a boat engine ticked as the metal cooled in the early morning air. The sound of something at rest that would, eventually, need to run again. Owen drank his coffee. Claire held hers. And the morning came in off the harbor, the way mornings do in that part of Rhode Island. In late September, gray and cold and clean, without apology, without ceremony, just the light arriving and doing what light does. 15 minutes later, she had Diana Marsh's number on the screen. 20 seconds after that, she pressed call. And Owen, who trusted machines because machines were predictable, stood quietly in the kitchen of his small apartment above the workshop and listened to Claire Beaumont do the single bravest thing he would ever see anyone do, which wasn't jumping into cold water. and it wasn't surviving something dangerous. It was picking up the phone and telling the truth out loud. Diana Marsh picked up on the second ring. That alone told Owen something. It was 6:40 in the morning. Attorneys who pick up on the second ring at 6:40 in the morning are either light sleepers or they've been waiting for a call they knew was coming. Claire walked to the far end of the small apartment while she talked, which Owen respected. He refilled his coffee and went to the workshop downstairs. Giving her what privacy his square footage allowed, he could hear her voice through the floor, not the words. Just the tone, and the tone was controlled, careful, deliberate. The voice of someone who had decided to tell the truth and was doing it the hard way. One sentence at a time. He was halfway through checking the oil on the Hatteras when she appeared at the top of the workshop stairs. 20 minutes later. "She wants me to come in," Claire said. "Today. This morning. As soon as possible." "Good." Owen straightened up and wiped his hands on a shop rag. "Do you need a ride?" She hesitated, just slightly. The hesitation of someone who is used to handling their own transportation and finds it unexpectedly difficult to accept help without reading something into it. "I can call a car." "I'll drive you," he said. Not an offer, just a statement. The way he'd have said it to Caleb. She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded. It was 7:10 when they left the marina. Owen's truck was old enough that the passenger window had to be held up with a folded piece of cardboard he'd wedged into the frame 3 months ago and kept meaning to fix. He noticed Claire notice it and say nothing. He appreciated that more than he could have explained. They didn't talk much on the way to Diana's office on Thames Street. The city was just waking up, coffee shops pulling their gates. A delivery truck double-parked outside a restaurant. The first joggers of the morning, moving along the waterfront. Newport in early morning had a different quality than Newport at any other hour. Quieter. More honest. Less concerned with what it looked like. "She believed me," Claire said. "About halfway there." Owen glanced at her. Diana. Yes, she was looking out the window. "I wasn't sure she would. I wasn't sure anyone would." He thought about that. About what it does to a person when they've been in a situation long enough that they can no longer predict whether the people who are supposed to be on their side actually are. When the uncertainty becomes so chronic that even receiving belief feels surprising. "You were sure enough," he said. "You called her." She turned and looked at him. "You made me." "No. I told you to. You did it." She was quiet after that, but it was a different kind of quiet than the ones before. This one had something in it that the others hadn't, something that wasn't quite relief, but was adjacent to it, the way dawn is adjacent to morning, without being the same thing. Diana Marsh's office was on the second floor of a building that had been a sail loft in a previous century, and still had the bones of one-high ceilings, wide plank floors, windows that looked out over the water. The kind of space that says the person who chose it has enough confidence not to need glass and marble to prove it. Diana herself was 62, gray-haired, and had the kind of face that had started out beautiful and evolved into something better, authoritative, precise. With eyes that processed information the way a good diagnostic computer processes engine data. Fast, completely, without sentiment interfering with accuracy. She was standing when they came in. She looked at Claire first, the full look, top to bottom. Taking inventory the way a doctor does when they're assessing something they can't yet name. Then she looked at Owen. "You're the man who pulled her out," she said. Not a question. "Owen Mercer," he said. "Diana Marsh." She didn't extend her hand. She turned back to Claire. "Sit down, both of you. I've been on the phone with the hospital this morning. Tell me what happened. Start from the dock, and don't leave anything out." Claire sat. Owen sat across from her at the long table, and Claire talked. She talked for 40 minutes. Diana asked questions, sharp, specific questions. The kind that cut through narrative to the structural fact underneath. What time exactly? What words exactly? Which hand? Which wrist? How long? Who was nearby? Who could have seen? What did he say after? What did you say? Owen sat quietly and listened and discovered, piece by piece, the full shape of a thing that he'd only seen the outline of before. The control had started gradually, not with cruelty, nothing so identifiable. It had started with devotion. Graham had been, in the beginning, the most attentive person Claire had ever been with, anticipating needs before she expressed them, managing details so she didn't have to, being, as he described himself, protective. It had taken almost 18 months for the edges of that protection to become visible. The way a suggestion became a preference, became a quiet pressure, became something you'd adjusted your behavior to accommodate without entirely remembering when you'd decided to do that. The friends who were gradually replaced by his friends. The professional decisions that he'd gently steered. The way her previous therapist, the one she'd been seeing for 4 years before she met Graham, had somehow become, through a series of small conversational moments, someone who doesn't really understand your situation. She'd stopped seeing her. She hadn't noticed she'd stopped until Diana, 2 years ago, had asked who she was talking to, and Claire had heard the answer come out of her own mouth. Nobody. The document, Diana said. The one he wanted you to sign. When did the pressure escalate? 6 months ago, Claire said. After my father's estate review. After the auditors confirmed the full value of the trust assets. She looked at the table. The number got into the newspaper. Not the full number, but enough. Diana nodded slowly, and after that, he became more urgent. About everything. About the wedding date, which kept getting pushed back. About my relationship with the board members. About where I was spending time. Who I was spending it with. She paused. He started asking about you. Diana's expression didn't change. What did he ask? Whether I trusted your advice. Whether I thought your relationship with my father might be affecting your perspective on him. She looked up. He said you'd never liked him. I've never trusted him, Diana said precisely. That's different. Claire almost smiled. How long before the incident on the dock did you tell him you wouldn't sign? Diana asked. 3 days, Claire said. I told him on Monday. The event was Thursday. And in those 3 days, what was his behavior? Claire was quiet for a moment. Calm, she said, very calm, which was more frightening than angry would have been. He was methodical. He started talking about the wedding again. He suggested we take a trip. He was affectionate. She paused. He was the version of himself that I'd fallen in love with. And I knew it was deliberate. And I still almost fell for it. Owen heard something in that sentence that hit him somewhere specific. The particular cruelty of being used against yourself. Of someone weaponizing your own feelings back at you. Diana wrote something on the notepad in front of her. Then she looked at Owen. You recorded nothing that night. No, Owen said. I had no reason to. But you witnessed his behavior on the dock, his physical positioning, his manner. Yes. And this morning's text. He texted me at 5:45. Diana's eyes sharpened. Do you still have it? Yes. Don't delete it. She looked between them. Either of you, don't delete anything. Don't alter anything. Don't respond to anything he sends without running it past me first. She set down her pen. Claire, I need to talk to you about the trust board meeting. Claire went still. What meeting? There's an emergency board session requested for Monday. Graham filed the request Wednesday, 2 days before the incident on the dock. The room got very quiet. Owen did the math. Graham had filed for an emergency board meeting 2 days before the event. The event, where he'd grabbed Claire's wrist at the edge of a dock in the dark. 2 days before he'd let go. He looked at Claire. She was looking at Diana. Her face was composed in that controlled way she had. But her hands on the table, her hands gave her away. Both of them pressed flat against the wood surface. Fingers straight. The posture of someone bracing against something. He knew, she said. He filed it before he knew whether I'd sign. He filed it in anticipation of an outcome. Diana said carefully. The agenda item is a competency review. The words sat there. Owen knew enough about estate law from his own custody situation, from years of contracting work involving corporate clients to understand what a contingency review in a trust context meant. It meant someone was building an argument that the beneficiary couldn't be trusted to make decisions about her own estate. He's going to say, "I'm unstable," Claire said. Her voice was flat after last night. "He doesn't know what you've told me," Diana said. "He knows I left the hospital AMA. He knows she stopped." Her eyes moved briefly to Owen. "He knows I didn't go home. Where does he think you are?" "I don't know." She picked up her phone. 15 texts overnight. 3 missed calls since 6 a.m. He's been reaching out. "Don't respond," Diana said. Then, to Owen, "I need to ask you something directly." "All right," he said. "Are you prepared to provide a written account of what you observed on the dock last night, and to preserve that text communication?" "Yes," he said, without hesitation, the way he'd answered when Caleb asked if he was scared. Just yes. Diana looked at him for a moment with those precise, assessing eyes. "Why?" she said. It was a blunt question, the kind that deserved a straight answer. "Because what she described," Owen said, "doesn't happen once. And I've seen enough things that were supposed to be accidents to know the difference between one and something that had a decision in it." Diana held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once and wrote something else on her notepad. They were walking out of Diana's office at 8:50 when Claire's phone rang. Not Graham this time. She looked at the screen and her entire expression changed. For the first time since the dock, she looked like herself, the version of herself that existed before all of this. Owen imagined. The relief was so complete and so immediate that it was almost painful to see. The way seeing something go right after a long time of everything going wrong can be almost painful. "Elise," she said, answering. And then, immediately, "No, I'm okay. I'm okay. I need to see you." She walked a few steps away. Owen waited by his truck. He could hear the rhythm of the call without the words, the back and forth. The escalation in Elise's voice, when she presumably heard more. The steadiness in Claire's, as she explained. When Claire came back to the truck, she looked different. Lighter, somehow. The specific lightness of someone who has stopped carrying something alone. "She's driving down from Boston," Claire said. "Good," Owen said. "She wants to know who you are." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. She got in the truck. I told her a man pulled me out of the water and then refused to look away. Owen got in the truck and started it and didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say to that. And because the cardboard wedged-in window immediately fell out and he had to reach over and put it back, which effectively ended the moment in the most workmanlike way possible." Claire laughed. A real one this time, surprised. Genuine, the kind that comes from somewhere that isn't performing anything. "Does that window always do that?" she asked. "Every single time," he said. They drove back to the marina. It was 9:40 when they got back. Owen had 3 calls from clients, 2 of which he returned from the parking lot, while Claire sat on the dock outside his workshop with her phone, texting what he assumed was Elise. He was on his second call when he saw the car. It was a black sedan, expensive, parked at the marina entrance in a spot that wasn't a parking spot, just pulled over, engine running, positioned to see the entire lot. Owen ended his call. He stood in the lot for a moment and looked at the car. The windows were tinted enough that he couldn't see the driver clearly, but the car didn't move. It just sat there, engine idling, watching. He walked to the workshop entrance and kept moving, like he hadn't noticed. Inside, he went immediately upstairs and looked out the apartment window from an angle where he couldn't be seen from the lot. The car was still there. He went back down and walked along the dock to where Claire was sitting. He sat beside her on the dock without preamble. "There's a car at the marina entrance," he said quietly. "Black sedan, parked where it shouldn't be. It's been sitting there since we got back." Claire didn't look up immediately. She finished the text she was sending, which Owen thought was either impressive discipline or the autopilot of someone who'd learned to function through a constant low level of threat. Then she looked up. She didn't look at the car. She looked at the water. "Black BMW," she said. "I couldn't tell the make." "Graham has a black BMW and a black Range Rover," she said. "He also has two people who work for him. Not security exactly. Men who handle things." Owen processed that. Men who handle things. The phrasing was precise in the way that evasive phrasing usually is. "How long has he had them?" he asked. "I thought they were drivers," she said, "for the first year. And then I realized they were also watching." She paused. "Where I went, who I talked to." Owen looked at the far end of the dock, at the boats in their slips, at the water moving in the morning light. He was a man who fixed things. He understood systems. He understood how components work together to produce an outcome, and he understood that the outcome Graham Ellison was working toward had been in planning for some time, with more infrastructure than someone having a bad night at a charity event. This wasn't a man who'd lost his temper on a dock. This was a man who had been building something. "We need to go inside," Owen said. "Now. And you need to call Diana back." They got up from the dock, walking back along the pier. Owen casually checked his peripheral vision. The sedan was still there. As they reached the workshop door, Owen's phone rang. Unknown number. Same area code as Graham's previous text. He answered it. "Mr. Mercer." The voice was smooth, warm. The voice from the dock. "I appreciate you picking up." "Mr. Ellison," Owen said. He kept his voice level. Calm the way he was calm when he was reading a situation, before deciding how to respond to it. Not warm, not hostile, neutral. The way a machine is neutral, before you tell it what to do. "I'll be direct," Graham said. "I understand Claire came to you last night. I understand she was upset and frightened, and possibly not thinking clearly after a traumatic experience. That's completely understandable." A pause. "She has a tendency to process things in ways that can seem alarming to people who don't know her history." Owen said nothing. "I'm not asking you to do anything," Graham continued. "I just want to come by and talk, man to man. I think if you understood the full picture, you'd see this differently." "What full picture?" Owen said. "Claire's been under a significant amount of pressure. Medical documentation. Actually, her physician has been concerned. I don't say that to be unkind. I love her. But there are reasons why the people in her life have been carefully managing her environment." Owen heard it. Medical documentation. Dropped carefully, casually, like it was incidental. The first building block of unstable woman making accusations. "I appreciate the call," Owen said. I don't think a meeting is necessary." Owen and the warmth dialed up precisely one notch. The warmth of a man adjusting a control. "You seem like a reasonable person. You did a good thing last night. Don't let it become something complicated." "I'm a simple man," Owen said. "I fix boats. Have a good morning." He hung up. Claire was standing behind him in the workshop doorway. She'd heard. From the look on her face, she'd heard enough. "Medical documentation," she said. "Yes. There is no medical documentation." Her voice was steady, but the steadiness cost her something. He could hear the cost. "I haven't had a physician's visit in 8 months. The last time I saw a doctor was a routine physical." "I know," Owen said. "How do you know?" "Because if there were legitimate medical documentation of instability, his attorney would have led with it, not him. He's testing what I'll believe." He looked at her. "He's seeing how much he can establish before you can contradict it." Claire was quiet, then. "You think like an attorney." "I think like someone who's been on the wrong side of a narrative," he said. "It teaches you how they're built." She looked at him carefully. There was a question in her eyes that she hadn't asked yet about his own history, his own version of this specific education, and he could see her decide, consciously, not to ask it. Not now, later, maybe. Right now, there were more immediate things. "The car's still there," she said. "I assume so. Then he knows I'm here." "Yes." She picked up her phone and called Diana. While she was on the phone, Owen walked to the small office in the corner of the workshop and pulled out the notebook he used for client invoices and job notes. He opened it to a blank page. He wrote the date, the time. He wrote down what Graham had said on the phone, word for word, as close to verbatim as he could manage, with timestamps. He'd spent 15 years documenting marine jobs, every part replaced, every hour logged, every conversation with a client recorded in case of dispute. He knew the value of contemporaneous notes. He knew that documentation written down the moment after something happened was the closest thing to proof that memory could generate. He wrote it all down. Diana's instructions, relayed through Claire 10 minutes later, were clear. Don't leave the marina. Don't engage with Graham directly. Elise would arrive by noon. Diana was filing an emergency to postpone the board meeting and had 2 calls to make before 10 a.m. And then Diana said something else, which Claire relayed with a particular kind of quiet. She says there's something you should know about the board meeting request. What? Owen said. Graham filled with a supporting document, Claire said. A psychological evaluation, dated 6 weeks ago. She looked at him. From a psychologist I've never seen, who apparently saw me 4 times. The workshop was silent for a moment. Fabricated, Owen said. Diana believes so. But it takes time to prove fabrication, and in that time she stopped. In that time the board reads it, and even if they don't fully believe it, it puts something in the room that's hard to take back out. Owen put his pen down. This was the shape of it. This was the full machine, the one that, assembling itself in the dark for 2 years or 4 years, or however long, Graham Ellison had understood that the Beaumont Harbor Trust was worth the investment of time and care, and the slow, patient construction of a reality that served him. The fabricated evaluation wasn't a reaction to last night. It had been in place for weeks, which meant the escalation on the dock had been planned for, which meant that whatever happened at the board meeting Monday was supposed to happen. Right? Whether Claire signed the document or not. The document was just the cleaner version of the outcome. The doc had been the messy version. He was going to do this regardless, Owen said. Yes, Claire said. She'd already worked it out. He could see it in her face, the awful clarity of finally seeing the shape of something you'd been inside of too long to see from outside. Then the timing actually helps, Owen said. She looked at him. Because you came forward before the board meeting, before he had the room. If you'd found out about the evaluation at the meeting, you'd have been reacting. Now Diana can move first. Claire was quiet. Then she said, "Why are you doing this?" He didn't answer right away. He picked up his pen. He wrote down the name. Graham had mentioned the psychologist, so it was in his notes. "I told you," he said. "I know what it looks like when someone has nowhere to go." "That's not a full answer," she said. He looked up. "No," he agreed. "It's not." She waited. "I have a son," he said, "Caleb. He's 9, and for about 18 months. When things were very bad between me and his mother, someone kept telling people who mattered that I was unstable, unreliable, not to be trusted with him." He held her gaze. None of it was true. All of it was believed. At least partially. For at least a while. Because the person saying it was calm and articulate and had more access to the systems that make decisions about people's lives than I did. He looked back at his notes. "Nobody helped me," he said simply. "I just want that to mean something." The workshop was very quiet. Outside, the harbor moved. A boat somewhere out on the water ran its engine up, and then back down, the sound of someone testing something, checking whether it still worked. At 11:50, a car pulled into the marina lot, not the black sedan that had gone. Sometime in the past hour, without Owen noticing exactly when. This was a small blue car that parked properly, in an actual space. And the woman who got out of it was moving fast from the moment her feet hit the pavement. Owen saw her from the workshop window, tall. Natural hair, wearing the expression of someone who has driven 2 hours in under 90 minutes and is fully prepared to do whatever comes next. He went to the workshop door and opened it. The woman Elise walked straight past him with a brief, assessing look that lasted exactly long enough to determine he was not a threat. And then, she was through the workshop, and up the stairs, and the sound of the reunion, between her and Claire, the words, the tears, the particular kind of noise that people make when they've been frightened, and the person who knows them best finally arrives, came down through the ceiling of the workshop, and Owen stood in the doorway and listened to it, and breathed. He went back to his notebook. He kept writing. At 12:30, Elise came downstairs alone. She stood in the workshop doorway and looked at him across the space for a moment. "She told me everything," she said. "Okay," Owen said. "She said you let her stay, that you didn't ask for anything. She needed somewhere to be." Elise studied him. "She also said you have a son." "Yes." "Where is he?" "His mother's. He comes to me every other weekend." Something moved across Elise's face. Recognition. Maybe. The kind of recognition that comes from knowing what that sentence actually costs to say casually. "Do you have any idea," she said carefully, "what you've gotten yourself into?" Owen looked at his notebook, at the pages of notes, times, words, observations. A record of the last 18 hours built one line at a time, out of the habit of documentation. "Getting a clearer picture," he said. Elise looked at him for another moment. Then she walked over to the once empty stool in the workshop and sat down on it, and looked at him with the direct, unflinching look of someone who loves someone else with their whole chest and will do anything to protect them. "Then let me fill you in," she said, "on the parts Claire doesn't know how to tell yet." And the story got larger. Elise didn't sit like someone who was about to have a casual conversation. She sat the way people sit when they've been carrying something heavy for a long time and have finally found a surface strong enough to set it on. She looked at Owen for a moment. The kind of look measured as a person, not by what they say, but by how they hold themselves when nobody's performing anything. And then she started talking. "Claire and I have been friends since we were 19, she said. "College. She was the most self-possessed person I'd ever met. Not cold, just clear. She always knew what she thought, and she wasn't afraid to say it." She paused. "I watched that change over 4 years. Gradually enough that you could almost miss it if you weren't paying attention. But I was paying attention." "What changed first?" Owen asked. "Her certainty," Elise said. "She stopped trusting her own read on situations. She'd call me and say, 'I think Graham is upset about this, but maybe I'm misreading it.' Or 'I think this doesn't feel right, but maybe I'm being oversensitive.' It would always be maybe. It was never maybe before Graham." Owen nodded. He understood the mechanism she was describing. He'd watched it operate from the outside on the dock last night, in the way Claire had moved around Graham's presence, the slight contraction of someone who has learned, through repetition, to take up less space. "When did you know it was serious?" he said. Elise looked at her hands. 14 months ago. She called me from the bathroom of a restaurant. They were at dinner with 2 of the board members and their wives. She called me from the bathroom because she needed to ask me whether it was reasonable for Graham to be annoyed that she'd answered a question one of the board members asked her directly, a question about her father's philosophy for the trust, without checking with him first. She stopped. She was calling me from a bathroom stall to ask whether she was allowed to answer a question about her own father. The workshop was quiet for a moment. "I told her to get out," Elise said. "Not the bathroom. The relationship. She wasn't ready, and I understood that I wasn't angry with her. I knew she wasn't ready, but I started keeping notes." Owen looked up. Notes. Dates. Things she told me. Screenshots of texts she sent me when she was upset, before she talked herself out of being upset. Elise reached into the bag she'd carried in from the car. She pulled out a folder, not a legal folder, just a manila envelope, the kind you buy at a drugstore, and she set it on the workbench between them. "I brought copies." Owen looked at the envelope. Then he looked at Elise. "Does Diana know about this?" "She does now. I called her from the car on the way here." "What did she say?" Elise allowed herself the smallest version of a satisfied expression. She said to bring the originals Monday. Owen picked up the envelope carefully. The way he'd handle a part he wasn't sure was still intact. He opened it and looked at the first page, a printed text conversation, dated 16 months back, between Elise's number and Claire's. He read 2 exchanges and put it back down. He didn't need to read the rest to understand what it was. "This is a record," he said. "Yes. You built this deliberately." "I hoped I'd never need it," Elise said. "But I built it like I would need it." Owen closed the envelope. He was quiet for a moment, thinking about what it meant that this existed. That somewhere in the history of the last 4 years, a woman in Boston had understood clearly enough what was happening to her best friend to begin, methodically and quietly, building evidence, while Claire was inside the situation. Elise had been outside it, watching, documenting, waiting for the moment when it would matter. That moment was now. "There's something else," Elise said. He looked at her. "The psychologist," she said. "The one who supposedly evaluated Claire 6 weeks ago. Graham submitted his name in the board documentation." Diana mentioned that. "His name is Dr. Richard Cole. He has a practice in Providence." She paused. "He also sat on the investment committee of one of Graham's family's holding companies 3 years ago. The overlap lasted 14 months. Owen was very still. "You looked him up," he said. "I looked him up at a rest stop on Route 95, she said evenly. "It took me 11 minutes. It took Owen a moment to process the full implication. A psychologist who had a documented financial relationship with Graham's family had produced a psychological evaluation of Claire that Claire had never participated in. That evaluation was now in the board documentation as supporting evidence for a competency review that had been filed on days before Graham walked Claire to the edge of a dock in the dark. This wasn't opportunism. This wasn't a man who'd lost his temper and was now covering his tracks. This was architecture. The whole thing had been designed. The evaluation, the board meeting, the timing of the event, all of it built in advance around an outcome that Graham had decided on before Claire even knew there was a decision being made. He was going to do this regardless of what she decided, Owen said. The same thing he'd said to Claire an hour ago, but with more weight now, with the evidence of it sitting in a drugstore envelope, on a workbench. "Yes," Elise said. The document she refused to sign was just the polite version. The board meeting was always the real move. Owen stood up. He went to the window and looked out at the lot empty now, the black sedan long gone, and then back at Elise. "The evaluation is fabricated," he said. "That's a crime." Diana's words exactly. "Does Claire know about Coel's connection to Graham?" "Not yet. I wanted to tell you first." She looked at him steadily. "Because you're the one who's going to be in the room when she finds out. And I needed to know whether you could handle what that's going to look like." Owen held her gaze. "I can handle it." "She's going to be angry," Elise said. "Not at you. But she's been holding herself together since last night, on a specific kind of logic, that Graham went too far in a moment of pressure, that it was bad but it was a moment. Finding out that he was building this months ago is a different thing. That's not a man who lost control. That's a man who had a plan. She's strong enough for it," Owen said. "I know she is," Elise said. "I'm asking if you are. Because she's going to need someone to stay steady when she isn't." He thought about the cold harbor water, the way she'd stopped fighting him once she heard his voice, the way she'd turned the phone face down on the table when she'd made her decision. "Yes," he said, "I'm steady." Elise looked at him for a long moment. The assessment in her eyes was different from Diana's, less legal, more personal. The specific evaluation of someone who loves another person completely and is deciding whether to trust a stranger with that love. Whatever she saw in him was apparently sufficient. She nodded. "Then let's go upstairs," she said. They found Claire at the small table with her phone, and Owen's notepad she'd been adding to his notes, he realized, filling in details from her own memory with the careful handwriting of someone who understood what the exercise was for. She looked up when they came in. She looked at Elise's face first, and then at Owen's. And she read something in both of them the way she'd learned to read rooms. "What?" she said. Elise sat down across from her. Owen remained standing near the kitchen counter, and Elise told her about Richard Cowell. She told it simply, without preamble, without softening. Because Claire didn't need softening. She needed the truth delivered at the same speed as reality, which was faster than comfortable. Claire listened. She was very still while she listened, and then she was quiet for a long moment after Elise finished. 6 weeks ago, she finally said. Yes. He was building this 6 weeks ago. The connection to Cowell is at least 3 years old, Elise said. The relationship was probably in place before that. Claire put both hands flat on the table, pressed them down. Owen watched her face move through something. He recognized the specific transition from shock to fury to the cold, clear-eyed place on the other side of fury, where decisions get made with the kind of precision that emotion, paradoxically, sometimes enables. He was never going to let me just walk away, she said. Not a question. No, Elise said. He needed to control the exit, Claire said. Either I sign and he has the trust, or I refuse and he discredits me and petitions the board for oversight. She looked up. Either way, he wins. That was always the design. Yes, Owen said from the kitchen. She looked at him. Did you know? I suspected the scope of it. Elise confirmed the specifics. How long have you suspected? Since this morning. When he texted me at 5:45, he held her gaze. A man who's acting impulsively doesn't reach out to a witness at 5:45 in the morning. A man who's managing a situation does. She absorbed that. Then she turned back to Elise. The evaluation. Can Diana get it thrown out? She's working on it. The professional relationship between Cowell Aintributpoint and the Ellison family holding company is documentable. That creates a conflict of interest significant enough to Talibai challenge the Aishen's admissibility before the board. But it takes time. Some, Elise said. Not as much as he's counting on. Claire nodded slowly. She looked at Owen's notepad at the notes she'd been adding to while they were downstairs. She looked at the manila envelope Elise had brought in, now sitting in the center of the table. Then she looked up at both of them. Monday, she said. The board meeting is Monday. That's 3 days. Diana is filing the postponement motion today, Owen said. If it's granted, Claire said. If it's not. Then we go Monday, Elise said, prepared. Claire was quiet again. Owen refilled his coffee, offered the pot to both women. Elise said yes. Claire didn't answer, which he took for a yes anyway, and poured. And then he sat down at the table. Because he was done standing apart from it, and it no longer made sense to pretend he was just a witness. Tell me about the board, he said to Claire. The members. Who knew your father? She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, the recognition that this conversation had moved from crisis management to strategy, and that strategy required her to think rather than just survive. The shift seemed to help her. He was learning. A person who functioned better when she had something concrete to do. 6 members, she said. 3 were appointed by my father. 2 were brought in after he died. Graham suggested both of them. One has been there for 20 years. A man named Hartwell, who knew my father before the trust existed. Hartwell, Owen said. He's not in Graham's pocket. No, but he's 78 and he defers to consensus. She thought about it. The 2 Graham brought in will vote with him. The 3 from my father's appointments, one of them, Barbara Cheng, has already told Diana she has concerns. The other 2 are uncertain. Which means Graham needs 1 more vote, Elise said. If it comes to a vote on the competency question, the evaluation was supposed to be that vote, Claire said. A credentialed psychological document saying, I'm not stable. It doesn't matter. If it's true, it creates enough doubt. Except now we know about Cowell, Owen said. We know. Whether the board knows by Monday is the question. Owen looked at his notepad. Then he made a decision. The same way he made most decisions, not because he was completely certain it was right, but because he was more certain about it than about anything else available. "I want to go to the board meeting," he said. Both women looked at him. "As what?" Claire said. "As a witness. An independent one. I have notes. I have the text Graham sent me this morning. I was on that dock. I'm a working man from the marina with no financial interest in this trust and no prior relationship with you." He held Claire's gaze. "In a room full of people who can be framed as having an agenda, I'm the person who has the least one." Claire looked at Elise. Elise looked at Claire. Some communication happened between them that didn't require words, the specific, shorthands of two people who've known each other long enough tend to have developed a private language. Then Elise looked back at Owen. "Diana's going to want to prep you." "Fine. He'll try to use you against her," Claire said. "If you're in that room, he'll try to make it look like she stopped." A particular discomfort crossed her face. "Like something it isn't. You mean he'll imply there's something between us?" Owen said. "Yes. He'll make you a character instead of a witness." "Let him try," Owen said. "I'm a marine repair contractor who lives above his workshop. I fix boats. I have a 9-year-old son I see every other weekend. I'm about as interesting as a bilge pump." He picked up his coffee. "The only interesting thing about me is what I saw on that dock, which is exactly the point." Claire looked at him for a long moment, the same look she'd given him when she first got in the truck that morning. When the window fell and she laughed, the look of someone recalibrating what they'd expected to find. "Okay," she said. Then her phone rang. Not Graham's number. A number she didn't recognize, but with a Newport area code. She looked at Owen. He shrugged. She answered it on speaker. "Ms. Beaumont." The voice was male, older, careful. "My name is Robert Hartwell. I'm a member of your father's trust board. I apologize for calling directly. I got your number from Diana Marsh. With her permission." Claire's eyes went wide. She looked at Owen. He made a small gesture. "Keep going." "Mr. Hartwell," she said, keeping her voice even. "Of course. Thank you for calling." "I'll be brief," Hartwell said. "I've been on this board for 20 years. I knew your father before he was who he became. I don't use that word often, but I respected him completely." A pause. "I received the documentation package for Monday's meeting yesterday evening. The evaluation, the meeting request, the supporting materials." Another pause. "I've been sitting with it since last night." The kitchen was absolutely silent. "Mr. Hartwell," Claire said carefully, "what would you like to say?" "I'd like to say," he said, slowly, "that in 20 years on this board, I've never seen an emergency competency review requested by a non-member. And I've never seen supporting documentation submitted by the fiancé of the beneficiary." A pause. "It raises questions. Procedural questions. Questions I intend to raise Monday, whether or not the postponement motion is granted." Claire closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were bright. "Thank you," she said. "Your father was a good man," Hartwell said simply. "I don't intend to let his life's work be decided in a meeting that smells like this one does." He paused. "Diana tells me there may be additional information regarding the evaluation's author."
"Yes,"
Claire said.
there is."
"Good. Bring it," and he hung up. Nobody in the kitchen moved for a moment. Then Elise said, very quietly, "Well, yeah," Owen said. Claire put her phone down on the table and looked at her hands and breathed. Just breathed. Owen watched her absorb what had just happened. Not a rescue, not someone fixing it, but something better than either. Someone who'd been in the room for 20 years and had a voice that mattered, choosing, of his own accord, to use it. "He's not going to let it go through without a fight," she said. "No," Owen said. "Graham doesn't know about Hartwell," Elise said. "He thinks he has the votes calculated." "Then Monday is going to be a surprise," Owen said. At 2:15, Owen's phone rang. He looked at the screen. A number he recognized. His lawyer, Tom Braddock, the same man who'd handled his custody case 3 years ago. He frowned and answered. "Tom." "Owen. Listen, I just got an interesting call. A man named Graham Ellison's attorney. reached out to my office this morning, asking questions about you." Owen stood up from the table. He walked into the corner of the workshop, out of earshot. "What kind of questions?" "Professional history. Whether you'd had any licensing disputes, anything involving legal complaints." Tom paused. "Owen, they're building a file on you." "I know," Owen said. "You know." Tom was quiet for a moment. "You want to tell me what you're in the middle of?" "Yes," Owen said, "but not on the phone. Can I come by this afternoon?" "I'll be here until 5, Tom said. And then, "Be careful. This kind of attorney doesn't make those calls unless the client is serious about what he's preparing to do." "I know," Owen said. "I'm being careful." He hung up. He stood in the corner of the workshop for a moment, looking at the floor, at the oil stains and scuff marks that mapped the last 3 years of his working life on these planks. Graham was building a file on him, which meant Graham already knew Owen was a variable he hadn't planned for. The rescue itself could be managed a good Samaritan, easily explained. But Owen staying involved. Owen driving Claire to Diana's office. Owen's workshop being where Claire had gone, that was a complication. And Graham Ellison responded to complications the way Owen suspected he responded to everything, by preparing to dismantle them. He went back upstairs. Both women looked at him when he came in. "Graham's attorney called my lawyer this morning," he said. "They're looking into my background." Elise didn't flinch. Claire did a brief, visible tightening. "Because of me," she said. "Because of him," Owen said, correcting her automatically, the same way he'd correct someone who blamed the tide for a navigation error. "He's doing it. You're not responsible for what he does." She looked at him. Something in her shifted, a small but real adjustment, like a joint that's been held wrong for so long that moving it correctly feels strange. "Is there anything?" Elise asked carefully. "In your background? Anything he could use?" "The custody dispute," Owen said. "My ex-wife's attorney said some things on record that weren't true. They couldn't prove them, but they're in the record." He paused. "And an unresolved complaint from a client 2 years ago, a man who claimed I damaged his boat. It was resolved in my favor, but the initial complaint exists." "How resolved?" Elise asked. "Arbitration. I have the documentation." "Tom Braddock," Claire said. She'd been listening carefully. "Your lawyer. He handled your custody case." "Yes." "Diana knows Tom Braddock," she said. "They've worked on the same side of 2 cases I know about. If Diana calls him." "Call Diana," Owen said. He sat down. "Right now. Tell her about Tom. Tell her about Graham's attorney. Let them talk." Claire picked up her phone while she called. Owen looked at Elise across the table. "He's going to come here," Owen said quietly. "Before Monday. He's going to come in person." Elise looked at him. "You think so?" "He came by phone this morning. He had someone parked in the lot this morning. He's building a file. He's doing everything at distance." Owen leaned forward. "Men like that don't stay at distance when they feel the situation moving against them. They come, and they try to reassert control in the room, because it's worked before." Elise was quiet for a moment. "What do we do if he does?" "We document it," Owen said. "We record it. We give him exactly enough rope to confirm everything Claire told Diana." He reached into the kitchen drawer, where he kept the charger cables, and the spare batteries, NATX, and the various small accumulations of a man who lived practically, and he pulled out a small digital recorder, the kind he used to document client conversations on complex jobs. Simple, reliable, the size of a thumb drive. He set it on the table. Elise looked at it, then at him. "Is that legal in Rhode Island?" "One-party consent state," Owen said. "As long as one person in the conversation knows it's being recorded, it's legal." "You've looked this up?" "I looked it up at 2 in the morning," he said, "when I couldn't sleep." Elise looked at the recorder. She looked at Owen. And then she said something he hadn't expected. "Claire's father would have liked you," she said, quietly. Not as a compliment, exactly as an observation. The kind you make when you've seen something true. Owen didn't know how to respond to that, so he just nodded. And then Claire came back to the table, off the phone, with a different energy focused, forward-leaning, the energy of someone who has been given a clear task and has decided to do it. Diana and Tom are talking, she said. Diana is filing the Cole conflict documentation tonight, Monday, ahead of Monday, and she's requesting that the board receive it before the meeting. She sat down. She looked at the recorder on the table. What's that for? For when Graham comes, Owen said. She looked at the recorder. Then she looked at him. You think he's coming? Yes. She was quiet for a moment, and then she reached out and put her hand on the recorders and slid it across the table until it was in front of her. She picked it up, turned it over in her hand, and then set it back down with the specific decisiveness of someone who has made a choice they're not going to unmake. Then we'll be ready, she said. He came at 4:58 in the afternoon. Owen heard the car. First, the engine note of something expensive, pulling into the marina lot with the unhurried certainty of someone who has never been told he isn't allowed somewhere. He was in the workshop, pretending to work on the Hatteras, and he heard it, and he straightened up and said, without raising his voice, "He's here." Elise, sitting in the workshop office with her phone and Hartwell's number in her recent calls, looked up. Claire, sitting on the stool beside the workbench, stood up. She reached into her jacket pocket and pressed the button on the recorder. Then she put her hands in her pockets and she stood straight. And she waited. The workshop door opened. Graham Ellison walked in like he owned the building, unhurried, composed, wearing a jacket that probably cost more than Owen's truck, carrying no visible anger, just that quality of controlled authority that, Owen now understood, was the instrument. The warmth was dialed up. The eyes were doing the thing where they looked at you like you were the most important person in the room, which was a technique and not an emotion. He looked at Elise, he looked at Owen, then he looked at Claire. There she is, he said, and his voice was gentle. Claire, thank God. Graham, she said. Her voice was level, perfectly, impressively level. I've been so worried, he said. He took a step toward her. After last night, leaving the hospital, not responding, he stopped, made a small pained gesture. I didn't know where you were. I know, she said. He looked at Owen. The warmth didn't leave his face, but something behind it adjusted. Mr. Mercer, I appreciate you looking out for her. I really do. She looked out for herself, Owen said. A brief pause, a small recalibration. Of course, he looked back at Claire. Can we talk? Privately. No, she said. A beat. Claire. No, she said again. Same tone, same volume, no escalation, no apology, just the word, repeated. Like she was describing a fact about the physical world. Graham looked at her, and for the first time, Owen saw something real cross his face, not the warmth, not the concern, but something underneath it. Something that had been there all along and had been, until this moment, successfully contained. I think you're making a mistake, he said. Still quiet, still controlled. But there was an edge under it now, very faint. Like the sound an engine makes right before it throws a belt. I know you do, Claire said. You've thought that for a while. The board meeting. I know about Richard Cole, she said. The workshop went very still. Graham didn't move for a long moment. He just looked at her. And the thing Owen had seen cross his face, that real thing, underneath the presentation, settled into something that was no longer warm at all. You've been busy, he said finally. I've been careful, she said. There's a difference. He looked at Owen. Is this your doing? No, Owen said. It's hers. Graham looked between them one more time. Then he straightened slightly, adjusted. And Owen watched him make the decision, the visible decision, the kind you can see in a person's posture, in the shift of their weight to change approaches. Claire, he said, and his voice went soft. The specific soft of someone using tenderness as a tool. Whatever you think you know, whatever they've told you, I love you. I have always loved you. Everything I've done has been to protect you. She looked at him, and something in her face in that moment was the bravest thing Owen had seen in 2 days of watching someone be brave. Not fury, not satisfaction, just clarity. The clarity of someone who sees something completely and is no longer confused by it. "I know you believe that," she said. "I think that's the saddest part." Graham stood there. For the first time, he had nothing to say. Elise stood up from the office. She crossed the workshop floor and stood beside Claire, not touching her, just there, present. The weight of 20 years of friendship occupying space. "I think you should leave," Elise said. Not aggressive, not theatrical, just a statement, delivered with the same calm authority that Graham himself used, turned back on him. In his own register. He looked at all three of them. He looked at Owen last. And then he turned. And he walked out of the workshop. And the door closed behind him. And his car started outside. And the expensive engine turned over and pulled away with the same unhurt certainty with which it had arrived. The workshop was silent. Claire let out a breath. Just one breath. Long and slow. The breath of someone who has been holding something for a very long time and has just at last put it down. Owen moved to the workbench and picked up the recorder and pressed stop. The small light on the device went dark. "Tell me he said enough," Elise said. Owen looked at the recorder. He thought about, "I know about Richard Cowell," and the silence that had followed it. He thought about whatever they've told you, and everything I've done has been to protect you, and in Graham's face. In Graham's, he'd looked at Claire and found, for the first time, a person who wasn't adjusting herself to accommodate him. "He said enough," Owen said. Claire nodded. She reached into her jacket pocket and checked the backup she'd had her own phone recording from the other side, which Owen had suggested, and she'd agreed to without hesitation. She looked at the screen. The file was there. 6 minutes and 43 seconds. 2 recordings, she said. "Belt and suspenders," Owen said. She almost smiled. That almost smile that kept arriving at the edge of her face, getting a little further each time. Then she straightened up. She looked at Elise, and then at Owen, and then at the closed workshop door, beyond which the marina lot was just a marina lot, again quiet. Ordinary, smelling of salt and diesel, and the particular end of September cold that had been present since Thursday night when everything started. "Monday," she said. "Monday," Owen agreed. And he went back to the Hatteras, because the engine still needed finishing, because work was what his hands knew how to do, and because some things in life were going to happen. Whether or not you were ready for them, and the best you could do was make sure you'd done everything possible before they did. He worked until dark. The recorder sat on the workbench beside him, small and plain and full. Sunday night, Owen didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with his notes spread in front of him, and a cup of coffee that had gone cold 2 hours ago. And he went through everything, one more time. Every timestamp, every word he'd written down. The sequence of the doc, the sequence of the texts, the sequence of Graham's visit to the workshop, and the 6 minutes and 43 seconds on the recorder that he had listened to 3 times now. Not because he doubted what was on it, but because he wanted to know it the way he knew an engine completely. Second, every component, so that when someone asked him a question about it in a room full of people he'd never met, the answer came from certainty, and not from straining to hold something together under pressure. Diana had called at 8 on Sunday evening. The postponement motion had been partially granted, not a full postponement, but a modification. The board meeting would proceed Monday at 2 p.m., but the competency suspension had been removed from the formal agenda, pending review of the Cowell documentation. Graham's attorney had pushed back hard. Diana said she could hear it in the opposing counsel's voice. The specific tightness of a lawyer whose client is angrier than the lawyer would prefer. "He's going to try to reintroduce it from the floor," Diana said. "It's a procedural move. Hartwell will object. But Graham's going to have his 2 votes try to move it back onto the agenda as new business." "Can they do that?" Owen asked. "They can try. The chair has discretion to allow or deny." Hartwell is co-chair. A pause. This is going to be decided in the room. Owen, by the people in the room, which is why I need you there. I'll be there, he said. He hung up and looked at his notes for another hour. Then he put them in order, put them in the same kind of manila envelope Elise had used, and set it beside the recorder on the table, where he could find it in the morning without thinking. He went to bed at midnight. He lay there in the dark and listened to the harbor and thought about Caleb. His weekend wasn't until next week, but he'd called on Sunday afternoon, the way he always did, when he wasn't sure how a week was going to go, not to say anything specific, just to hear his son's voice and let his son hear his. Caleb had asked, in that direct way children have when they're old enough to sense something without being old enough to name it. Dad, is everything okay? Getting there, bud, Owen had said. Is it the lady from the water? Owen had paused. He'd told Caleb enough, not the details, but enough, yeah, kind of. Is she okay? She's getting there, too. Caleb had been quiet for a moment, and then, with the simple, unadorned confidence of a 9-year-old who has decided something is true. She's lucky you were there. Owen had held the phone and not said anything for a moment. Maybe, he'd finally said. Not maybe, Caleb said definitely. He fell asleep sometime after 1 and woke at 5:30 to his alarm, which he hadn't needed because he'd been half awake since 4. He showered, dressed, ate something he didn't taste, and was, by 6:15, in the wardrobe 15 doing the last 2 hours of work on the Hatteras, because the engine needed finishing, and because he worked better when his hands were occupied, and he had something real and mechanical to hold on to. At 8:40, his phone rang. Claire. He filed an injunction this morning, she said. Her voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it, not fear. Something older than fear. The specific exhaustion of someone who has been fighting a long time and has just discovered there's more to fight. Against Diana. A motion claiming conflict of interest in her representation of me based on her prior relationship with my father's estate. Owen set down the wrench he was holding. Can it stick? Diana says no. She says it's a delay tactic and a transparently bad one, and she can have it dismissed by noon. But it means he's rattled, Owen said. A pause. Yes. A man who's confident in his position doesn't burn a delay tactic the morning of the meeting, Owen said. He saves it. He used it this morning because something changed and he's reacting. He picked the wrench back up. What changed is the recorder. He knows we have something from his visit. He doesn't know how much. Then we let him wonder, Claire said. Yes, Owen said. That's exactly what we do. She was quiet for a moment. He heard her breathe, just breathe. The slow, deliberate breath of someone managing their state, the way you manage a system that's under load. I'm scared, she said quietly, without apology. Just the fact of it. I know, he said. I've been in rooms with powerful people my whole life, she said. I grew up in rooms like this. I know how they work. I know how to be in them. Another breath. But this is different, because this time I'm not just in the room. I'm the thing being decided. Owen held the phone and looked at the engine in front of him, the Hatteras engine. Clean now, properly reassembled, ready to run the way it was built to run. You're not the thing being decided, he said. You're the person who decides. That's the difference between where you were a week ago and where you are right now. She was quiet for a long moment. Owen, she said. Yeah, thank you. Just that. The same 2 words she'd said in his apartment 4 days ago, but carrying something different now, not just relief, not just gratitude. Something that had been built over 4 days of shared early mornings and cold coffee and parallel note-taking, and the specific trust that develops between people who have stood in difficult rooms together, and neither one ran. See you at 2, he said. The Beaumont Harbor Trust offices were on Bellevue Avenue, in a building that had been a private club in the 19th century, and still had the weight of that history in its walls, the kind of building that reminded you, without saying so, that certain decisions had been made in rooms like this one for a very long time, by people who understood that the rooms themselves were part of the argument. Owen arrived at 1:40. He was wearing the cleanest thing he owned that could pass for business casual dark pants, a gray button-down, the jacket he wore to Caleb's school events. He was aware, walking into that building, that he looked exactly like what he was, a working man from the marina. He decided that was fine. He decided it was better than fine. Diana met him in the lobby. She was in full attorney mode, precise, brisk, radiating the particular energy of someone who has slept 4 hours and processed it into focus rather than fatigue. The injunction was dismissed at 11:50. She said without preamble. Graham's attorney called mine at 12:15 to discuss a settlement framework. Owen looked at her. A settlement, which I declined to discuss until after the meeting. She handed him a visitor badge. He's offering to withdraw the competency question, in exchange for Claire agreeing not to pursue the Cole documentation through official channels. He's trying to make it go away quietly, Owen said.
Yes.
Which tells you everything about how confident he actually is. She clipped her own badge. We go in, we present what we have. We let the board do what boards do when they're given the actual facts. You'll be called as a witness to the dock incident and to his visit to your workshop. Keep your answers direct. Don't editorialize. You're not there to prosecute him. You're there to describe what you saw. Understood. And Owen. She looked at him directly. He's going to try to make you look like something you're not. His attorney will try to establish a personal relationship between you and Claire that reframes your testimony. Don't get angry. Don't get defensive. Just tell the truth at the same volume you're using right now. I can do that, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded, and they went up. The boardroom was exactly what the building promised: long table, high windows, the weight of accumulated institutional decisions in the air. 6 board members were already seated when Owen and Diana entered. Hartwell was at the head of the table, 78 years old, and more solid than some men half his age, with the steady eyes of someone who has seen a great many things, try to look other things, and has gotten good at the distinction. Graham was already there, seated at the far end of the table with his attorney, a man named Prescott who had the sleek, expensive look of someone who billed by the quarter hour and knew it. Graham looked up when Owen entered. Something crossed his face, brief, controlled, gone in under a second, but Owen caught it. He'd been watching for it. It was recognition. The recognition of a man who has planned for variables and has just seen one he didn't fully account for walk into the room in person. Claire came in at 2 minutes to 2, with Elise behind her. She was dressed in the way that said she belonged in this room without saying anything else about it. Simple. Precise. The clothing of someone who grew up knowing exactly what these rooms required. She sat across from Graham without looking at him. She looked at Hartwell. Hartwell called the meeting to order at 2 p.m. exactly. The first 30 minutes were procedural, the official agenda, the formal business, the review of the trust's quarterly positions. Graham's attorney attempted twice to introduce the competency question as new business. Hartwell denied both attempts, citing the pending documentation review. His carrying the specific authority of someone there in him who has chaired enough meetings to know exactly how much of his discretion he's entitled to use. Graham's second board vote, a man named Frazier, smooth, mid-50s. The kind of person who'd been recruited for his agreeableness, raised a point of order after the second denial. Hartwell looked at him with the patience of someone who has dealt with points of order for 30 years. The point is noted, Hartwell said, and overruled. Frazier sat back. Graham, at the end of the table, was still, the specific stillness of someone maintaining composure through effort rather than ease. Then Diana stood up. She presented the Cole documentation in 8 minutes. She was efficient, factual, devastating in the way that only facts can be devastating when they're arranged in the right order, by someone who knows what order that is. The Prosortionen, the professional relationship between Richard Cole and the Ellison family holding company dates. Amounts documented overlap with the period during which the evaluation was supposedly conducted. The evaluation itself, dated 6 weeks prior, purporting to document 4 sessions with Claire Beaumont. Claire's medical records confirming no such sessions occurred. The room was quiet while Diana talked. A specific kind of quiet, the quiet of people absorbing information, that is, rearranging what they thought they knew. Barbara Cheng, the board member, who'd already told Diana she had concerns, made notes. She made a lot of notes. Hartwell watched Graham while Diana talked. Not aggressively, just steadily. The way you watch something you've been uncertain about, and are now becoming certain about. Graham's attorney objected twice. Both objections were procedural and thin, and Diana answered them in 1 sentence each. Then Diana called Owen. He stood. He spoke for 12 minutes. He described the doc, what he saw, when, in what sequence. He described Graham's arrival. He described the positioning, the manner, the words he'd heard. He described the text at 5:45 in the morning, and he produced the screenshot, printed and dated, and Diana submitted it to the board. He described the workshop visit. He described what Graham had said. He described the recorder, the consent framework, under Rhode Island law, and he submitted the transcript which Tom Braddock had spent Sunday afternoon preparing to the board. He spoke in the same voice he'd used with Diana in the lobby. Direct, factual. The voice of someone who has nothing to prove, and therefore nothing to perform. Graham's attorney cross-examined him for 9 minutes. He asked about Owen's relationship with Claire. Owen described it accurately. A woman he pulled from the water, who came to his door, who he helped because he had a space for her to be safe, and he'd once needed that, and no one had given it to him. He said it without apology and without drama. Just the truth, in order. He was asked about his custody dispute. He answered accurately. He was asked about the unresolved client complaint. He answered accurately and produced the arbitration documentation that Tom had included in the packet. Graham's attorney tried one more thing, he suggested, with the kind of careful phrasing that is designed to imply, without asserting, that Owen's presence was motivated by personal interest in Claire Beaumont's financial circumstances. Owen looked at the attorney for a moment. Then he looked at the board. "I'm a marine repair contractor," he said. "I live above my workshop. I see my son every other weekend. The most expensive thing I own is my truck, which needs a new window mechanism." He looked back at the attorney. "I didn't know who Claire Beaumont was when I jumped in that water. I didn't know what the Beaumont Harbor Trust was. I knew a person was drowning, and I could reach her. A pause. That's still all I know how to do. Reach people I can reach." The attorney had nothing for that. Owen sat down. Claire testified for 22 minutes. She was composed and precise, and she told the truth, the way she'd told it to Owen at his kitchen table, at 2 in the morning, without performance, without excess. Without the hedging she'd spent 4 years developing around a man who'd made her uncertain of her own perceptions. She described the doc. She described what Graham had said. She described the wrist, the edge, the release. She described what she'd seen on his face while she was going into the water. She described 4 years of gradual diminishment with the specificity of someone who had, over the past 4 days, finally been given permission to see it clearly. And then she put Elise's manila envelope on the table. 14 months of dated notes and screenshot text records. A secondary record maintained externally by someone with no financial interest in the trust and no relationship with Graham Ellison. Hartwell picked up the envelope and looked through it slowly. Then he passed it to Barbara Cheng. She looked through it. She passed it to the board member beside her. Graham was very still at the end of the table. Then something happened that nobody in the room had expected. Fraser Graham's reliable second vote, the man who'd raised the point of order an hour ago, picked up Elise's envelope and looked through it for a long moment. And then he set it down and looked at Graham. And the look on his face was the look of a man doing rapid internal recalculation. "Graham," he said. His voice was careful. "Is there anything you want to say to this board?" A silence. Graham looked at Frazier, then at the board, then at Claire, and Owen, watching from his seat, saw him make the decision, the same kind of visible decision he'd seen him make in the workshop when he'd chosen to change approaches. Except this time, there was no new approach available. This time the decision was about containment. "I'd like to speak with my attorney privately," Graham said. Hartwell looked at the clock on the wall. "You have 10 minutes, he said. Graham and Prescott left the room. The board members talked quietly among themselves. Diana leaned over and said something to Claire that Owen couldn't hear. Claire nodded. She looked at the table. Then she looked at Owen, across the room, and for a moment, it was just the two of them, looking at each other across a long table, in a room full of people, and he couldn't read everything in her expression. But he could read the part that mattered. She was still standing. Graham and Prescott came back in 8 minutes. Prescott spoke. He informed the board that Graham Ellison was withdrawing all documentation submitted in support of the emergency meeting, including the competency review request and the psychological evaluation. He was additionally withdrawing from the trust advisory role he'd held for the past 18 months. He did not admit anything. Prescott was too good for admissions, but the withdrawal said everything the words didn't. Hartwell let him finish. Then he looked at the board. Any objections to accepting the withdrawal? Nobody spoke. Motion carries. The competency question is permanently removed from all future agendas. He looked at Claire. Ms. Beaumont, the trust remains under the governance structure established by your father. An independent oversight review will be initiated within 30 days, as I should have moved for 6 months ago. A pause. I apologize for the delay. Claire looked at Hartwell. Thank you, Robert, she said. Just his first name. The name of someone she'd known since childhood, who'd known her father, who'd been in the room for 20 years, and had, when it mattered, done the right thing. The meeting was adjourned at 4:17. Graham left without speaking to anyone. Prescott followed him. Owen watched them go and felt something in the room decompress, like pressure releasing from a system that's been running over capacity, buttered. The specific relief of something returning to its correct operating state. Outside the building, on the steps, with the September light, doing what September light does in Newport Long and Golden, and a little melancholy. The light of a season-ending Claire stood with Elise and Diana and Owen, and for a moment nobody said anything necessary. Then Elise started laughing, not performatively, just the real laugh of relief, of 4 days of tension finding the exit it needed, of the specific joy that comes from fighting something that seemed larger than you, and finding out you were large enough. Claire started laughing too, and it was the most complete sound Owen had heard from her, not the surprised laugh in the truck, not the almost smile in the workshop. This was the whole thing. Claire Beaumont, laughing on the steps of a building, where something that could take everything from her had just failed. Diana allowed herself a brief, satisfied expression. Then she said she had calls to make, shook hands with Owen, with a firmness that said she respected him in the specific way. She respected people who performed under pressure, and walked to her car. Elise hugged Claire for a long time. Then she looked at Owen, over Claire's shoulder, and gave him a single nod that carried 20 years of friendship and the specific acknowledgement of someone who had trusted a stranger with something irreplaceable and had not been wrong. The weeks after were quieter, not easy. Nothing about rebuilding the aftermath of something like that is easy, but quieter in the way that the absence of active threat allows us to be quiet. Graham's attorney sent a formal letter 7 days later. The psychological evaluation was officially retracted. Richard Cowell voluntarily surrendered his license before a formal board complaint could be filed, which Diana said was the clearest possible confirmation of what they'd already known. Graham Ellison's name appeared 6 weeks later. in connection with a civil fraud inquiry involving one of his family's holding companies, not the trust. Something older. Something that had apparently been waiting for someone to look at it directly. Owen read about it in the newspaper and set the paper down and went back to work. Claire moved out of the house she'd shared with Graham within 10 days of the board meeting. She moved into a small cottage near the water, not at the marina, a mile up the coast, a place she'd apparently known since childhood, and had somehow never gotten around to renting for herself. She sent Owen a text when she got the keys. It said, "I can see the water from every room." He texted back, "Good." The independent oversight review of the trust concluded in November. The board restructured with 2 new independent members. Barbara Cheng was named chair. The trust's community programs, the ones Claire's father had built it around, were fully funded for the next 3 years. Owen finished the Hatteras 2 days after the board meeting. The client picked it up without complaining about anything, which was a minor miracle, and paid on time, which was a major one. Caleb came that weekend. They went fishing, as promised. They caught nothing worth keeping, which was fine, because they hadn't really gone for the catching. They sat in Owen's small boat on the water for 4 hours and talked about school and volcanoes, and whether a man could theoretically live on a boat permanently, and what you'd do about laundry. On the second day of the weekend, Claire came by the marina. She brought coffee and stood on the dock while Caleb showed her the boat and explained, at some length and with great technical authority, the difference between the kinds of fish you catch in a harbor versus open water. She listened with the full attention of someone who is genuinely interested, which she was, and which Caleb perceived with the accuracy that children have, about such things. When Caleb went inside to use the bathroom, Claire stood with Owen on the dock, and they looked at the water for a moment. "He's a good kid," she said. "Yeah," Owen said, "he is. He has your instincts." Owen looked at her. "What instincts?" "The kind that move before thinking about it," she said. "The kind that jump." He thought about that. About a dock and dark water, and work boots hitting the harbor. About a knock on a door at 1:17 in the morning and stepping aside to let someone in. About a recorder on a workbench and a notepad full of timestamps, and a 9-year-old who said definitely when his father said maybe. "He gets that from his mother," Owen said. Claire smiled, the full version, the one that had been working its way out over the past month, getting a little easier each time, a little less careful about whether it was safe to arrive. They stood on the dock while the harbor moved around them, and the light did what light does in October in Newport, lower and cleaner than September. The light of something settling in rather than passing through, and neither of them said anything for a while, because neither of them needed to. Caleb came back out and immediately wanted to know if Claire had ever been on a boat in bad weather. She had. She told him about it. He listened with his whole body, the way 9-year-olds listen to things that are actually interesting to them. And Owen stood beside them both and watched his son's face, and thought about the thing he'd said to Caleb on the phone the night it started. "I helped somebody tonight," and how that sentence, which had seemed complete at the time, had turned out to be only the beginning of a much longer one. 2 years later, the Beaumont Harbor Trust launched an apprenticeship program, Marine Trades, working waterfront. Hands-on instruction for young people from Newport and the surrounding communities who wanted to learn a trade that connected them to the water. The program was Claire's design, built over 18 months of conversations with people who knew the waterfront the way Owen did from the inside, from the work, from the daily reality of maintaining something that most people only appreciated from a distance. They asked Owen to run the technical training component. He said yes without taking long to decide. The program launched on a Thursday in late September, exactly 2 years after a woman fell into the harbor, and a man with his boots still on jumped in after her. At the launch, Claire spoke to the assembled board members and community stakeholders, and the first cohort of 6 apprentices, young Pipleys, with perhaps teens and early 20s, with the a particular combination of eagerness and uncertainty that people have when they're fatin. Starting something real viral. She talked about her father. She talked about what he'd believed the trust was for. She talked about the waterfront as a living thing, a thing that needed people who knew how to care for it and were willing to stay. She didn't talk about Graham. There was nothing to say about Graham that the past 2 years hadn't already said more clearly than she could. When she was done, she looked at Owen in the back of the room, and he held her gaze, and neither of them needed the room. For that moment, it was just the two of them. Briefly, the way it had been on a dock in the dark when she'd found him in a crowd and mouthed two words that changed everything. They married on a Saturday in June, on the dock at Owen's Marina, because it was his place, and it was where it had started, and there was no point in pretending otherwise. 20 people, Caleb, 11 by then, served as best man, with the serious dignity of someone who understands the weight of a job and intends to do it correctly. Elise cried. Diana did not, but shook Owen's hand afterward, with the same firmness she'd used on the steps of the trust building, and said, "Good," which was, from Diana, a complete and sufficient expression of feeling. Hartwell came. He was 80 now, moving carefully. But he stood through the whole ceremony, and afterward told Owen that he'd known Claire's father for 30 years, and that he believed, with the confidence of a man who has seen enough of life to have earned his beliefs, that her father would have been satisfied with how things had turned out. Owen thanked him and meant it. Standing on that dock in June, with the harbor around them and Caleb beside him, and Claire across from him with her hands in his, and the sun doing what June sun does over Newport water, that same harbor, that same water, the exact water into which he had jumped on a Thursday 8 in September 2 years. Before Owen thought about what it meant that you could stand in the same place where something terrible almost happened and feel nothing but grateful. He thought about machines, about how he'd spent most of his adult life trusting them over people, because machines were predictable and people were not. How he still believed that, mostly. How engines still made more immediate sense to him than most conversations. And how none of that had mattered on a Thursday night at the end of September, when something older and simpler than all of it had taken over and put him over in the water before he'd had time to be sensible about it. He hadn't saved her, he'd reached her. She'd done the rest herself in his kitchen at 2 in the morning, on the phone with Diana at dawn, in a boardroom on a Monday afternoon where she'd stood up inside a story that had been written around her and changed the ending. He'd just refused to look away. And in a life that had taught him, through custody schedules and broken partnerships and 11-hour days above a quiet harbor, that looking away was the safer, simpler, more sustainable option. Refusing to do it had turned out to be the only thing that mattered. Caleb squeezed his arm at the dock in the June sun, and Owen looked at his son. "You okay, Dad?" Caleb asked. Almost 12 now, still asking. "Yeah, Bud," Owen said. "I'm okay." And this time, completely and without qualification, it was true.